The sun was slowly setting behind the dry hills, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. The porch of the ranch creaked under the weight of time, as if every wooden board carried an old memory. 2 wooden chairs sat side by side. In one of them, a man wearing a worn hat watched the horizon. In the other, an elderly woman rested a shawl over her shoulders. Henry and Margaret had been married for more than 50 years. They were never known for grand declarations. Their life had always spoken more through what was done than through what was said. In that quiet late afternoon, time seemed to slow down, as if it respected the story of that couple. Some loves grow in noise. Others learn to survive in silence. And sometimes, when almost everything has already passed, the heart finally finds the courage to look back. If you appreciate stories told slowly, stories about life, love, and what truly matters, consider subscribing to Moments That Matter. Stay with us until the end. Henry woke before dawn, even now, when his body asked for more rest than work. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, but the habit was carved into his bones. He rose quietly, pulled on his worn boots, and placed the hat on his head, the same one that had followed him for decades. The house was still asleep, and he liked it that way. The silence of early morning had always been his most faithful companion. Outside, the ranch breathed slowly. The smell of cool earth mixed with the scent of old wood from the fences. Henry walked with measured steps toward the corral, running his hand along the posts as if checking that everything was still in its place. It wasn't about the work itself, but about the feeling of continuity. As long as he could walk that land, he felt he still belonged somewhere. Inside the house, Margaret woke a little later. She did not rush. She put on her simple dress, pinned back her gray hair, and carefully lit the old stove. The crackle of the firewood was familiar, almost comforting. She prepared the coffee the way she always had, no written recipe, only memory. When Henry returned, everything was ready. They sat at the table, facing each other. A brief look, a nearly imperceptible nod. There was no conversation. There rarely had been. But within that silence lived something solid, built day after day, over an entire lifetime. Henry learned early that the world did not stop to listen to feelings. He grew up watching men who spoke little and worked hard. Love, to him, always meant responsibility. It meant waking early, providing for the household, keeping the ranch standing even when his body ached. He was never harsh, only reserved. He never learned how to translate what he felt into words. Margaret, on the other hand, learned to listen to what was never said. From a young age, she understood that Henry showed care in different ways. He fixed the door before the wind came in, left firewood ready for cold nights, made sure food was never lacking. She accepted that as his language of love. While Henry spent his days among fences, cattle, and dust, Margaret held the home together. She raised the children, kept the house in order, and quietly nurtured faith through small daily rituals. She never demanded explanations or promises. She simply remained. As the years passed, the children grew. One by one, they left to follow their own paths. The house, once full of voices, became too large. Henry said it was the natural course of life. Margaret agreed, but felt the absence like cold. She didn't complain, she simply covered herself. They aged that way. One working in silence, the other waiting in silence. And without realizing it, they learned to live with everything that was never spoken. The photographs on the wall told a story the house no longer lived. Children running through the yard, simple birthday celebrations, laughter frozen on paper. Margaret cleaned those frames carefully, as if touching them were a way to keep her children close. Visits became rare over the years. First came school, then work, then life itself. Phone calls grew shorter. Letters were replaced by occasional messages. Henry accepted it without question. He said the children were living, doing what they needed to do. Margaret never disagreed. She simply kept important dates in her memory. She wrote birthdays in an old notebook. She prayed for each of them before sleeping, even when no news came. The grandchildren were known more through photographs than through embraces. Margaret spoke of them with affection, even without knowing them well. Henry listened in silence, his expression a mixture of pride and something difficult to name. The distance was not made only of miles. It was made of time, of choices, of accumulated silences. And although neither of them said it out loud, both felt that something had been lost along the way. Not for lack of love, but for lack of presence, something only noticed when time has already walked too far ahead. The first signs were small, almost unnoticed. Margaret grew tired more easily. She sat down more often, rested her hand on the table before standing. Henry noticed but said nothing. Part of him believed that ignoring it was a way of keeping everything as it had always been. One day, while preparing lunch, Margaret let the pot slip from her hands. The sound of metal hitting the floor echoed through the empty house. Henry ran in from outside, his heart racing like it hadn't in years. She was seated, pale but calm. She said it was just a distraction. She smiled, as she always did, to reassure him. Henry nodded, but something inside him shifted. For the first time, he realized that time was not a distant idea. It was there, inside the house, inside them. That night, Henry struggled to sleep. He watched Margaret breathe, feeling the weight of every year they had lived together. He thought about how many times she had cared for him without asking for anything in return. About how many times he had chosen work when he could have stayed. It wasn't loud regret. It was quieter than that. A late awareness that life does not wait. And that some realizations, when they arrive too late, require courage to face. That night felt longer than the others. The wind blew gently, tapping against the windows. Henry remained awake, sitting on the edge of the bed while Margaret slept. He studied the lines on her face, now shaped by time, and wondered when it had all happened. He remembered the young woman he had met so many years before, strong, calm, determined. He thought about everything she had done for the family without ever complaining. About how she had always been there, even when he hadn't. Henry was not a man who revisited the past, but that night, memories came without asking permission. He saw the children when they were small, the absences, the quiet promises he made to himself that one day there would be more time. Now, time felt smaller. Margaret woke briefly and noticed him there. She touched his hand. She didn't ask anything. She simply smiled, a simple smile, full of understanding. As if to say everything was all right. But for Henry, it no longer was. Something needed to change. Even if it was late. Even if it was small. Because in that heavy silence, he understood that he was still alive. And while there is life, there is still choice. A few days later, the sound of a car broke the ranch's routine. Dust rose along the narrow road, announcing a visit that was no longer common. Margaret looked through the window and recognized the vehicle before it even stopped. It was their eldest son. Her heart filled with restrained emotion. She adjusted her dress, smoothed her hair, and walked to the door with careful steps. The embrace was long and quiet, heavy with years that would not return. Henry watched from a distance. He felt pride, but also a strange weight in his chest. He realized how accustomed he had become to absence. They talked in the living room, about work, travel, responsibilities. Everything seemed normal. Yet something unspoken lingered in the air. Margaret listened more than she spoke. Henry spoke even less. The visit brought joy, but it also brought awareness. Time had passed for everyone. The children were now adults, burdened with their own responsibilities. That night, after their son went to sleep, Henry sat on the porch. The sky was clear, filled with stars. He realized that just as the children had left, one day he too would leave. And he wondered what he would leave behind besides a well-kept ranch. That night, Henry did not rise early. He sat at the table in silence while Margaret prepared the coffee. The weight of his thoughts felt heavier than his body. When they were alone, Henry spoke. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't polished. It was simple and broken. He said he felt he had spent too much time working. He said he might have arrived too late for some things. He said he didn't know how to say it before. Margaret listened attentively. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she held his hand. The grip was firm, despite her apparent fragility. She said she had always known, that she had never blamed him, that each of them loved in the way they knew how. Something loosened inside Henry. It wasn't guilt. It was release. For the first time, he cried without shame. Not loudly. He simply let the tears fall. The next morning, Henry woke before sunrise, as he always did. His body moved out of habit, but something inside him felt different. Instead of putting on his boots and heading to the corral, he stayed in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the old stove, the neatly lined cups, the quiet of the house. He decided to stay. He lit the fire carefully, the way he had watched Margaret do thousands of times. The water took longer to boil. The coffee went a little too strong. The smell wasn't perfect. Still, he didn't stop. He poured 2 cups with steady hands, even though he felt a slight tremble. Margaret entered the kitchen and paused for a moment. She didn't comment on the taste of the coffee. She didn't correct anything. She simply sat at the table and looked at him with a small smile, full of meaning. That simple gesture said everything that had never been spoken. Henry sat down too. For the first time in many years, he didn't seem to be in a hurry. He listened to the sound of the spoon, felt the warmth of the cup in his hands, and realized something new. Being present was also work. A kind of work he had put off for far too long. There were no promises, no speeches, just presence. And in that moment, Henry understood that real change doesn't begin with beautiful words, but with quiet decisions, small choices made on ordinary days, slowly reshaping an entire life. Henry and Margaret's faith was never filled with complicated words. It never needed long explanations. It lived in daily gestures, in simple care, in accepting what could not be changed. That day, before lunch, Margaret closed her eyes as she always did. She gave thanks in silence. She asked for nothing. She simply acknowledged. She acknowledged the life they had lived, the good days, the hard ones, and even the painful ones. Henry removed his hat and stood beside her. He didn't know exactly what to say, but he felt that the moment deserved respect. For the first time, the silence didn't make him uncomfortable. It felt full. He thought about everything he had received without noticing. He thought about the woman beside him, steady even when he had been distant. He thought about their children, each one following a different path, and accepted that life does not move backward. Faith, in that moment, did not promise miracles. It did not erase regrets, but it offered something perhaps even more valuable: peace. Peace to accept what had been. Peace to live what still remained. Henry understood that faith is not the absence of failure, but the courage to keep going despite it. And for the first time in many years, he felt true gratitude. Not loud, just steady, like the ground beneath his feet. The days that followed moved at a different pace. Slower, more attentive. Henry began sitting on the porch more often, watching the sunset beside Margaret, without feeling the need to fill the silence. Margaret, in turn, learned to accept help. She allowed Henry to carry the heavier things, even when he did it awkwardly. She laughed softly when he made mistakes, not out of mockery, but out of tenderness. They started walking together across the ranch, short steps, respecting what their bodies could give. They spoke little, but when they did, it was about the present. The past had already been lived. The future didn't need too much planning. Henry discovered that growing old wasn't about losing strength. It was about gaining awareness. Margaret discovered that loving also meant allowing herself to be cared for. Their love was never built on grand gestures. It was built on staying, on remaining, even when it would have been easier to withdraw, even when silence felt heavier than words. And on that old ranch, among worn fences and simple days, They learned that growing old together doesn't mean having all the answers. It means choosing, every single day, to stay, with flaws, with limits, with truth. Time doesn't warn us when it passes. It simply passes. And many times, we only realize the value of people when the silence becomes too loud. But as long as there is today, there is still room for small gestures. A look. A presence. An apology. A cup of coffee made imperfectly, but with intention. It's not too late to be closer. It's not too late to listen. It's not too late to love better, even if in simple ways. Family is not the absence of mistakes. It is the choice to remain. If you still have someone by your side, cherish them. If you feel you arrived late to some things, remember this: being present now is already a powerful beginning. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Moments That Matter. And leave a comment sharing who this story reminded you of.